My daughter Jessica called me last Tuesday evening, her voice bubbling with excitement about their upcoming Christmas celebration. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. Oh, and Harry, this year we're doing adults only for Christmas dinner. You understand, right? It's going to be so much more sophisticated without all the chaos. The silence stretched between us as I processed what she just said. Adults only? At Christmas? When I'm the one who's been paying half her mortgage for 3 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone felt heavy in my weathered hands as I sat in my old recliner, the Oregon December rain pattering against the windows of my small craftsman house on Maple Street. At 68, I'd thought I'd seen every kind of disappointment life could offer, but Jessica's casual dismissal of our family traditions hit differently. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner. This was about Emma and Jake, my 8 and 6-year-old grandchildren, being excluded from their own family celebration because their presence might interfere with my daughter's vision of elegant adult conversation. I stared at the framed photos on my mantelpiece, dozens of Christmas mornings captured in glossy prints. Emma's gap-toothed grin as she unwrapped her first bicycle. Jake's wonderstruck face when he found the train set under the tree last year. Jessica herself as a little girl clutching a stuffed reindeer I'd saved 3 months to buy after her mother passed when she was 7. Back then, Christmas was sacred to us. It was the one day when grief took a back seat to joy, when our little family of 2 felt complete despite the empty chair at our table. Now Jessica lived in that pristine 2-story house in Maplewood subdivision with Brandon, her real estate agent husband, who spoke in sales pitches and wore cologne that cost more than my monthly groceries. The house I helped them buy by co-signing the loan when their credit wasn't quite good enough. The house whose mortgage I'd been quietly supplementing for 3 years, sending Jessica $800 every month so they could maintain their lifestyle while she worked part-time and Brandon's commission checks remained unpredictable. She'd never asked directly. It started small, a casual mention of being tight on money one month, a hint that they might have to move somewhere smaller if things didn't improve. I'd offered to help, just temporarily, just until Brandon's business picked up. That was 36 months and nearly $30,000 ago. The temporary help had become an expectation, never acknowledged directly, but always assumed, woven into the fabric of their monthly budget like utilities or groceries. I pulled myself from the recliner, my knees protesting after 40 years of carrying mail through Riverside's residential neighborhoods. The house felt too quiet now, just the hum of the old refrigerator and the whisper of rain against glass. I walked to the kitchen, where I'd been planning the Christmas menu I'd been cooking for the family for the past 6 years since Brandon joined us. Prime rib, Yorkshire pudding, Emma's favorite green bean casserole, and Jake's special request for chocolate cookies shaped like Christmas trees. The grocery list sat on my kitchen table, written in my careful handwriting, budgeted down to the last penny from my modest postal pension. I'd planned to spend nearly $200 on this meal, money I'd saved by eating canned soup for lunch every day in November. Money that would now go unspent because my presence apparently wasn't sophisticated enough for Jessica's new vision of Christmas. I thought back to our phone conversation, searching for clues I'd missed. Jessica had sounded different lately, her voice taking on the polished tone she used with her marketing clients. She had been posting more on social media, photos of their house's professionally decorated interior, their weekend trips to Portland's wine country, Brandon in his expensive suits at real estate networking events. Their life looked perfect from the outside, all gleaming surfaces and carefully curated moments. But I knew the truth behind those photos. I saw the bills when I helped with their finances, the credit card statements, the car payments for vehicles that cost more than I'd made in 6 months, the country club membership Brandon insisted was essential for business. They lived like they made twice what they actually earned, and my monthly contributions were the invisible foundation that kept their house of cards from tumbling down. The rain picked up outside, drumming harder against my windows. I made a cup of coffee with grounds I'd been stretching for 2 weeks, adding extra water to make the can last longer. The bitter taste matched my mood as I sat back down, staring at the photo of last Christmas. All of us around my small dining table, Jessica laughing at something Emma had said, Brandon actually smiling genuinely for once, the kids covered in flour from helping me bake cookies that morning. That was before Jessica started spending time with the Maplewood wives, those women who turned neighborhood gossip into an art form and measured success by the thread count of their table linens. I'd met a few of them at Emma's school functions, their conversations a careful dance of humble bragging and subtle competition. They spoke about their children's private music lessons and European vacations with practiced casualness, their words designed to establish hierarchies as surely as military stripes. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thanks for being so understanding about Christmas, Harry. We'll do something with you and the kids later in the week. Maybe dinner at that diner you like." The diner I like. As if my preference for Riverside Cafe's meatloaf over their trendy farm-to-table restaurants was some charming quirk rather than a practical necessity given my budget. I set the phone aside without responding, something I'd never done before. Jessica was used to my immediate agreement, my ready acceptance of whatever she decided. For 32 years, I'd been the dad who said yes, who made things work, who sacrificed quietly so she could have what she needed. When she wanted dance lessons, I worked overtime. When she needed a car for college, I took out a loan. When she got married, I emptied my savings account to pay for the wedding she dreamed of. The pattern was so established that Jessica had stopped seeing my help as generosity and started viewing it as obligation. My role in her life had shifted from father to financial safety net, always there to catch her when she overextended, never expecting anything in return except her casual gratitude and the privilege of remaining useful. But this Christmas exclusion felt different. This wasn't about money or practical help. This was about my worth as a human being, my value as a grandfather, my place in the family I'd spent decades building and supporting. Jessica had decided that I wasn't good enough for her new social circle, that my presence would somehow diminish the sophisticated atmosphere she wanted to create. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the lockbox where I kept my important papers. Inside, beneath my will and insurance policies, was a folder I'd never shown anyone. Bank statements showing the steady $800 transfers to Jessica's account, copies of the mortgage documents where my name appeared as co-signer, records of every loan I'd helped with, every bill I'd quietly paid, every financial crisis I'd solved with my checkbook and my silence. For the first time in 3 years, I really looked at the numbers. Nearly $30,000 in direct payments, plus the mortgage liability that would fall on me if they defaulted. Money I could have used to travel, to fix the leaky roof over my bedroom, to build the workshop I'd always wanted in my backyard. Money that had bought me nothing but the privilege of being treated like an ATM with emotional attachments. I closed the folder and sat on the edge of my bed, the reality of my situation settling over me like a heavy blanket. I'd raised Jessica to be independent and strong, but somewhere along the way, I taught her that my love could be measured in dollar signs. Every time I'd solved her problems with money, instead of letting her figure things out, I'd reinforced the idea that my primary value was financial. The house creaked around me, 40 years of memories soaked into its walls. This was where Jessica had learned to ride a bike in the backyard, where she'd cried over her first heartbreak, where she'd brought Brandon to meet me for the first time. I'd imagined growing old here, with grandchildren's laughter echoing through these rooms, continuing the traditions that had sustained us through loss and hardship. Now those grandchildren were being taught that Christmas was an adults-only affair, that their grandfather wasn't refined enough for the family celebration. Emma and Jake would spend Christmas morning at their house, excluded from the dinner their mother deemed too sophisticated for children, learning that love came with conditions and family came with requirements. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I thought about calling Jessica back, maybe offering to pay for catering to make the dinner more elegant, or suggesting I could help with childcare so the adults could enjoy their sophisticated conversation. The old Harry would have done exactly that, would have found a way to solve the problem by opening his wallet wider. But sitting there in my bedroom, surrounded by evidence of my financial generosity and emotional dismissal, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was time to stop solving Jessica's problems with money. Maybe it was time to let her figure out how sophisticated her Christmas dinner would be when the mortgage payment came due and my $800 wasn't automatically deposited into her account. The rain continued its steady drumbeat against my windows as I made a decision that would change everything. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't going to send that monthly payment. For the first time in Jessica's adult life, I was going to let her experience the consequences of her choices without my financial safety net beneath her. I had no idea how much my daughter's world was about to change or how much mine was about to improve. The notification sound from my phone pierced morning silence 3 days later. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the frost melt off my backyard fence. December in Riverside meant gray skies and bare trees, the kind of weather that matched my mood perfectly. I glanced at the screen and saw Jessica's name above a social media post that made my stomach drop. "Some people just don't understand that Christmas traditions need to evolve," she'd written, accompanied by a photo of her dining room table set with crystal glasses and gold-rimmed plates. "Not everyone appreciates the effort that goes into creating magical moments for the people who matter most." The comments below were already piling up from her Maplewood friends, each one a perfectly crafted agreement that twisted the knife deeper. "You're so right, Jess. Some relatives just can't adapt to growth. Family can be so difficult when you're trying to elevate your traditions. Good for you for setting boundaries. Your home, your rules." I scrolled through more responses, my chest tightening with each passive-aggressive observation. These women didn't know me, had never sat at my table or watched me teach their children how to make paper snowflakes. Yet they were judging me based on Jessica's carefully crafted narrative. I was the obstacle to her sophisticated Christmas, the relative who couldn't appreciate her elevated traditions. My hand shook as I set the phone down, the coffee cup rattling against the saucer. 40 years of carrying mail had taught me to keep my head down and my opinions to myself. But this public humiliation felt like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't just excluded me from Christmas dinner, she'd turned my disappointment into entertainment for her social circle. The doorbell rang, startling me from my spiral of anger and hurt. I opened it to find Dorothy Chen on my front porch, her silver hair tucked under a wool hat and her arms crossed in a way that meant business. Dot had lived next door for 15 years. Ever since her husband passed, and she'd moved to Riverside to be closer to her daughter. At 71, she had the energy of someone half her age and the directness of someone who'd stopped caring about social niceties decades ago. "Harold Thompson, I just saw that ridiculous post from your daughter, and I'm madder than a wet hen," she announced, pushing past me into my living room. "That girl has completely lost her mind if she thinks she can treat you like yesterday's garbage on the internet for everyone to see." I closed the door behind her, grateful for the interruption to my self-pity session, but embarrassed that Dot had seen Jessica's public dismissal of me. "It's family business, Dot. I'll handle it." She turned to face me, her brown eyes flashing behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Handle it? Harry, that child is destroying your reputation while you're sitting here drinking coffee and feeling sorry for yourself. Do you know what people are saying at the community center? They're wondering what kind of man gets publicly shamed by his own daughter." The words stung because they were true. Riverside was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and Jessica's social media presence had made our family conflict very public. I sank into my recliner, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. "What am I supposed to do, Dot? She's my daughter. I can't fight with her on the internet." Dot sat on my couch, leaning forward with the intensity of a general planning battle strategy. "You're not fighting with her, Harry. You're defending yourself. There's a difference." She pulled out her own phone, scrolling through what I assumed was Jessica's post. "Look at this nonsense. Creating magical moments for the people who matter most. What does that make you and those grandchildren? People who don't matter?" I'd been trying not to think about Emma and Jake, about how they must feel being excluded from their own family's Christmas celebration. Yesterday, I'd driven past Pine Valley Elementary during afternoon pickup, hoping to catch a glimpse of them, but Jessica picked them up on the other side of the school where I couldn't park. The realization that I was now someone she actively avoided hit harder than her social media posts. "She's trying to fit in with those Maplewood women," I said, as much to myself as to Dot. "Brandon's always pushing her to network, to make connections that'll help his real estate business. Maybe she thinks having a postal worker father doesn't fit their image." Dot snorted, a sound that conveyed her opinion of Brandon and his networking strategies. "Harry, I've been watching you for 15 years. You've shoveled my driveway without being asked, fixed my back gate 3 times, and never missed bringing Emma and Jake trick-or-treating to my door. If your daughter is embarrassed by the man who raised her to have everything she wanted, that's her failing, not yours." She stood up, pacing to my front window where she could see Jessica's house in the distance. The 2-story colonial, with its perfect landscaping and 3-car garage, was visible from my smaller craftsman home, a constant reminder of the life my financial support had helped create. "How much money have you given them over the years, Harry? And don't tell me it's none of my business, because they made it everyone's business when they decided to humiliate you publicly." I'd never told anyone the exact amount, too embarrassed by my own enabling to admit the scope of it. But sitting there with Dot's fierce loyalty burning in my living room, the truth felt less shameful than the silence. $30,000 in direct payments over 3 years. Plus, I co-signed their mortgage when their credit wasn't good enough. Dot turned from the window, her mouth falling open. $30,000? Harold Thompson, are you telling me you've been bankrolling their lifestyle while they're treating you like an embarrassment? The shame I'd been carrying crystallized into something sharper, more focused. She never asked directly. It was always hints, suggestions that they were struggling. I wanted to help. Help is one thing. Being taken advantage of is another. Dot sat back down, her voice gentler but still firm. What kind of struggling people exclude their financial benefactor from family celebrations? What kind of daughter posts on social media about people not mattering while cashing her father's monthly checks? Her questions hung in the air, highlighting the contradictions I'd been too close to see clearly. Jessica had been playing 2 roles simultaneously: the struggling daughter who needed her father's financial support, and the sophisticated social climber who found that same father too embarrassing for her elevated circles. She'd been having her cake and eating it too, accepting my money while rejecting my presence. "There's something else," I said, pulling out the folder from my lockbox. "I've been keeping records. Every payment, every bill I've helped with. I thought it was just being organized, but now I'm wondering if some part of me knew this day would come." Dot examined the bank statements, her expression growing more outraged with each page. "Harry, this is evidence of fraud if she's been misrepresenting her financial situation. Look at these credit card statements: designer clothes, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country. They're not struggling, they're living beyond their means and using your guilt to subsidize their champagne lifestyle." I thought about Jessica's recent social media posts. The photos of her and Brandon at upscale restaurants, the shopping trips to Portland, the new furniture that appeared in their house with suspicious regularity. None of it looked like the lifestyle of people who genuinely couldn't afford their mortgage payment. "She's been playing you," Dot continued, her voice rising with indignation, and now she's publicly shaming you for not being sophisticated enough for her Christmas party. The same Christmas party that your money probably paid for? The realization hit me like cold water. The crystal glasses in Jessica's photo, the gold-rimmed plates, the elaborate table setting she was so proud of. Had my monthly payments funded her sophisticated Christmas that I wasn't good enough to attend? The irony was so bitter I could taste it. My phone buzzed again. Another comment on Jessica's post, this time from someone I recognized. Margaret Walsh from the Riverside Community Center, where I had volunteered for the past 5 years organizing the annual toy drive. Some people just can't be happy for others' success, she'd written, clearly having bought into Jessica's narrative completely. The betrayal expanded beyond my family now, reaching into my community, my volunteer work, the relationships I'd built over decades of quiet service. Jessica's version of events was spreading, painting me as the bitter old man who couldn't appreciate his daughter's growth and sophistication. The truth, that I'd been financially enabling that growth while being emotionally discarded, wasn't part of her story. I need to stop the payments, I said suddenly, the decision crystallizing with startling clarity. Not as punishment, but because I've been enabling this. Every month I send that money, I'm telling her it's okay to treat me like an ATM. Dot nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking straight. But Harry, you need to be prepared for how she'll react. People who've been taken advantage of don't like it when the advantage stops. I thought about Jessica's personality, her tendency toward drama, her need to control narratives. She wouldn't quietly accept the loss of income. She'd escalate, probably publicly, turning me into the villain who abandoned his struggling daughter. The woman who just excluded me from Christmas for not being sophisticated enough for her Christmas party. The same Christmas party that your money probably paid for? Let her react, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Maybe it's time people saw what happens when she doesn't get what she wants. Dot smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all morning. There's the Harry I know. The man who stood up to City Hall when they wanted to tear down the community garden. The man who organized the neighborhood watch when those break-ins happened. You just forgot yourself for a while. She was right. I'd spent so many years being Jessica's father that I'd forgotten how to be my own man. Every decision filtered through how it would affect her, every choice measured by whether it would help or disappoint her. I'd lost myself in the role of provider, supporter, enabler. What do I do about Emma and Jake? I asked, voicing the fear that kept me awake at nights. If I cut off the money, Jessica might not let me see them. Dot's expression softened. Harry, if your daughter is willing to use those children as weapons against their grandfather, then she's already shown you who she really is. You can't enable bad behavior to maintain a relationship that only exists on her terms. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, filled with new possibilities and terrifying uncertainties. For the first time in 3 years, I wouldn't be automatically transferring $800 to Jessica's account. For the first time in my daughter's adult life, she'd have to face her financial choices without my safety net. I had no idea how dramatically her sophisticated Christmas celebration was about to change, or how much my own life was about to improve. The first week without sending Jessica her monthly payment felt like walking on broken glass. Every morning I'd wake up expecting angry phone calls, dramatic confrontations, or emergency visits claiming financial catastrophe. Instead, I got silence. Complete, unsettling silence that stretched across the days like a taut wire waiting to snap. It wasn't until Dot knocked on my door Saturday morning with a manila folder under her arm that I realized Jessica's lack of response might be more strategic than I had imagined. Harold, we need to talk. Dot said, settling into my kitchen chair with the purposeful air of someone who'd been conducting research. I've been doing some digging into your daughter's situation, and what I found is going to make you furious. I poured her coffee, noting the intensity in her expression. Over the past week, Dot had become my unofficial investigation partner, using her decades as a librarian to research Jessica and Brandon's public records with the thoroughness of a detective. She'd convinced me that understanding the full scope of their deception was necessary before Jessica inevitably escalated her demands. Remember how Jessica always claimed they were struggling to make ends meet? Dot opened the folder, revealing printed pages that looked official and damning. Well, I have a friend who works at the county assessor's office. Your daughter and son-in-law aren't just living comfortably, Harold, they're living like royalty. She spread out property tax documents showing the true value of Jessica's house, mortgage records revealing their actual monthly payments, and vehicle registrations for not one, but 3 cars, including a luxury SUV I'd never seen. The numbers swam before my eyes, each figure representing another layer of deception I'd been too trusting to uncover. Their mortgage payment is only $1,200 a month, Dot continued, pointing to the highlighted figure. You've been sending them $800 every month for what they claimed was mortgage help. But Harry, they didn't need mortgage help. They needed luxury supplement money. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I processed the implications. $800 a month on top of a $1,200 mortgage meant Jessica and Brandon had been living as if their house payment was only $400. No wonder they could afford designer clothes and weekend getaways. My monthly contributions had been funding their entertainment budget while they cried poverty to justify taking my money. There's more, Dot said, pulling out credit reports she'd somehow obtained through channels I didn't want to know about. Look at their spending patterns.
The same week you'd transfer money, they'd make large purchases. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, that crystal and china set she's been showing off on social media. I studied the timeline she'd created. My monthly payments marked in red, their luxury purchases marked in blue. The correlation was undeniable and sickening. Jessica had been using my financial support like a monthly allowance for discretionary spending, not survival assistance. Every dollar I'd sacrificed from my modest pension had gone directly toward maintaining their facade of affluence. But here's the really interesting part, Dot continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I also looked into Brandon's real estate business. Those networking events, that country club membership he claimed was essential for clients, his sales records are public information through the state licensing board. She handed me another document that made my blood pressure spike. Brandon's commission records showed he'd had an excellent year, earning nearly twice what Jessica had led me to believe. The struggling businessman narrative was as fabricated as their mortgage crisis. They weren't a young couple trying to make it. They were successful professionals who'd found a convenient way to live above their means by exploiting my parental guilt. They've been running a con game on you for 3 years, Dot said bluntly. And now that you've stopped paying, they're probably scrambling to figure out how to maintain their lifestyle without Daddy's monthly donation. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of systematic deception settling over me like a heavy blanket. Every phone call claiming financial stress, every hint about possibly losing the house, every guilt-inducing suggestion that I was their only hope had been carefully orchestrated manipulation designed to keep my wallet open and my questions minimal. How did I miss this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd wanted to believe Jessica needed me, wanted to feel useful and important in her adult life. The possibility that my help wasn't necessary but merely convenient had never occurred to me because it would have meant acknowledging that my daughter saw me as a resource rather than a father. You missed it because you're a good man who trusted his daughter, Dot said firmly. But Harold, you need to understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just financial irresponsibility. This is calculated fraud designed to exploit your emotions. She pulled out her phone, showing Jessica's latest social media posts from the past week. Photos of a spa day with her Maplewood friends, a shopping trip to Portland's upscale Pearl District, dinner at a restaurant where entrees cost more than my weekly grocery budget, all posted while she hadn't bothered to call or text asking about the missing $800. She's not panicking about the money because she doesn't actually need it, I realized aloud. The lifestyle reduction would be inconvenient, not catastrophic. Dot nodded grimly, which means when she does finally contact you, it won't be about genuine financial hardship. It'll be about maintaining the comfortable situation she's become accustomed to. My phone rang, as if summoned by our conversation. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and both Dot and I stared at it like it might explode. I let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speaker so Dot could witness whatever performance Jessica was about to deliver. "Harry, we need to talk." Jessica's voice came through the phone with an edge I'd never heard before. Not panicked or desperate, but annoyed, like I'd committed some social faux pas that required correction. "There seems to be some kind of problem with our banking. Your usual transfer didn't come through this month." The casual dismissal of $30,000 in gifts as a usual transfer made my jaw clench. No acknowledgement of my generosity, no gratitude for years of support, just irritation that her expected income hadn't materialized on schedule.
The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When Jessica finally spoke, her tone had shifted from annoyed to coldly furious. "Stop sending the payments? Harry, we have commitments. We have a lifestyle to maintain. You can't just arbitrarily decide to abandon your responsibilities." Her choice of words sent a chill through me. My responsibilities? Not her appreciation for my generosity, not her understanding of my sacrifice, but my obligations to fund their comfortable existence. In Jessica's mind, my financial support had transformed from gift to entitlement so gradually that she genuinely believed I owed her that money. "My responsibilities ended when you excluded me from Christmas for not being sophisticated enough," I replied, watching Dot pump her fist in silent approval. "You can't cash my checks while treating me like an embarrassment." "This isn't about Christmas," Jessica shot back, her voice rising. "This is about family loyalty. This is about keeping your word when people depend on you." The manipulation was so blatant it took my breath away. Family loyalty that only flowed in one direction. Dependence that had been artificially created and carefully maintained. Keeping my word about an agreement I'd never actually made. Supporting people who demonstrated no reciprocal commitment to supporting me. "Jessica, I've given you nearly $30,000 over 3 years," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "I've co-signed your mortgage and covered your emergencies. In return, you've excluded me from family celebrations and publicly humiliated me on social media. That doesn't sound like family loyalty to me." Another long pause, then Jessica's voice returned with a dangerous sweetness that reminded me of her childhood tantrums. "Harry, I think you're having some kind of episode. Maybe we should talk about this in person. Brandon and I could come over tonight, help you think through this decision more clearly." The condescending tone, the suggestion that my boundary setting was a mental health crisis, the assumption that she and Brandon could simply show up and talk me back into compliance, it all crystallized my understanding of how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Jessica wasn't treating me like a father making a difficult decision. She was treating me like a malfunctioning ATM that needed technical repair. "Don't come over," I said firmly, "and don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize for 3 years of taking advantage of my generosity while treating me like a second-class family member." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking not with fear but with liberation. For the first time in years, I'd stood up to Jessica's manipulation without immediately caving to her emotional pressure. The silence in my kitchen felt different now, not empty, but full of possibilities. Dot reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Harold Thompson, I am so proud of you right now, I could cry. That girl just learned that Daddy doesn't roll over on command anymore." My phone immediately started buzzing with text messages, Jessica's digital tantrum beginning in earnest. I glanced at the first few, accusations of abandonment, threats about the grandchildren, predictions of family destruction,
then turned the phone face down without reading the rest. "She's going to escalate," I said, though the prospect no longer filled me with dread. Jessica doesn't like being told no. "Let her escalate," Dot said, with grim satisfaction. "We've got documentation of everything now. Her lies about needing money, her actual financial situation, her pattern of manipulation. If she wants to make this uglier, we're ready." The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen window, illuminating the folder of evidence that had transformed my understanding of the past 3 years. I wasn't a generous father who'd been helping his struggling daughter. I was a victim of financial abuse who'd finally found the courage to stop enabling his abuser.
The distinction made all the difference in how I planned to handle whatever Jessica threw at me next. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick envelope. My name was typed across the front in bold letters, and the return address bore the logo of Henderson, Walsh & Associates, one of Portland's most expensive law firms. I stood in my doorway holding what I already knew would be Jessica's nuclear option, her final attempt to force me back into financial compliance through legal intimidation. Dot was at my kitchen table within 10 minutes of my phone call, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined the documents with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent decades parsing complex texts. The lawsuit demanded $50,000 in what Jessica's lawyers called promised financial support, plus another $30,000 in damages for breach of verbal contract and emotional distress. The legal language was dense and intimidating, clearly designed to overwhelm someone like me into immediate settlement. "This is garbage wrapped in expensive letterhead," Dot announced, slapping the papers down with disgust. "Look at this claim about emotional distress. She's suing you for the emotional trauma of having to pay her own bills." I read through Jessica's sworn statement, each paragraph a masterpiece of creative fiction. According to her version of events, I had explicitly promised to support her family indefinitely, creating financial dependence that she'd relied upon for major life decisions. The lawsuit painted me as a manipulative father who'd used promises of financial support to control his daughter, then cruelly withdrawn that support without warning, causing severe financial and emotional damage. The document contained details about Jessica and Brandon's lifestyle that were clearly exaggerated. Private school tuition for Emma and Jake that didn't exist since they attended public Pine Valley Elementary, medical expenses for conditions no one in the family actually had, a laundry list of financial obligations that seemed designed to justify the astronomical damages they were seeking. "She's betting you'll be too intimidated to fight this," Dot said, pulling out her own phone. "Expensive lawyers, complicated legal language, threats of public court proceedings. It's designed to make you panic and write a check to make it go away." But I wasn't panicking. The past weeks of uncovering Jessica's deceptions had inoculated me against her manipulation tactics. If anything, the lawsuit felt like confirmation that I'd made the right decision. People who were genuinely grateful for years of generous support didn't typically respond to its withdrawal by hiring lawyers and demanding additional payments. "I need a lawyer," I said, reaching for my phone. "Someone who understands financial abuse cases." Dot smiled grimly. "Already ahead of you. Remember my friend at the assessor's office? Her daughter, Maggie O'Sullivan, is a family attorney who specializes in exactly these kinds of cases. She's expecting your call." Maggie's office was located in a modest building downtown, nothing like the gleaming tower that housed Jessica's legal team. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of Dot. When I showed her the lawsuit and the evidence Dot had compiled, her expression shifted from professional interest to barely contained outrage. "This is one of the most blatant examples of financial elder abuse I've seen," she said, spreading out our documentation alongside Jessica's legal claims. "Your daughter has been systematically exploiting your generosity, and now she's trying to use the court system to force you to continue the exploitation." She pointed to specific discrepancies between Jessica's lawsuit claims and the financial records we'd obtained. "Look here. She claims you promised to pay private school tuition, but her children attend public Pine Valley Elementary. She lists medical expenses for conditions no one in the family actually had. A laundry list of financial obligations that seemed designed to justify the astronomical damages they were seeking." Maggie's analysis of Jessica's case was devastating and thorough.
The timeline of her supposed dependence on my support didn't match the reality of her spending patterns. The claims of emotional distress were undermined by her social media posts showing expensive vacations and luxury purchases. Most damning of all, the financial records showed that Jessica and Brandon's actual income was sufficient to cover all their legitimate expenses without any assistance from me. "We're not just going to defend against this lawsuit," Maggie announced, her voice taking on the tone of someone who'd found a cause worth fighting for. "We're going to file a countersuit for financial elder abuse and fraud. Your daughter has been obtaining money under false pretenses for years. That's a crime, not a contract dispute." The countersuit Maggie prepared was a thing of beauty, each claim supported by documented evidence of Jessica's deceptions. Bank records showing the correlation between my payments and her luxury purchases. Property records proving she'd misrepresented her housing costs. Social media posts demonstrating that her lifestyle was incompatible with the financial distress she'd claimed. Text messages and emails where she had manipulated me into providing money through false claims of emergency. "The beautiful thing about people like your daughter," Maggie explained as she finalized our legal response, "is that they document their own crimes. Every social media post showing off expensive purchases while claiming poverty, every text message manipulating you for money, every lie about their financial situation, it's all evidence of systematic fraud." The process of preparing our defense revealed the true scope of Jessica's manipulation in ways that were both enlightening and heartbreaking. Maggie had me gather every communication from the past 3 years, and reading them chronologically showed a clear pattern of escalating financial exploitation. What had started as occasional requests for help had evolved into sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to keep me contributing money regardless of their actual need. "Your daughter is what we call a financial predator," Maggie explained during one of our preparation sessions. "She identified your emotional vulnerabilities. Your love for her, your desire to be helpful, your fear of being excluded from her life, and weaponized them to create a steady income stream." The evidence collection process was exhausting but cathartic. Every bank statement, every text message, every social media post that revealed another layer of Jessica's deception also represented another step toward freedom from her manipulation. I began to see the lawsuit not as an attack, but as an opportunity to finally establish clear boundaries with documentation that couldn't be argued away. When Jessica's lawyers received our countersuit, their response was swift and revealing. Within 48 hours, I received a phone call from Jessica herself, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine panic for the first time in our entire conflict. "Harry, we need to talk," she said, her previous condescending tone replaced by something much more desperate. "This has gotten completely out of hand. Can't we just settle this quietly? I'm willing to drop the lawsuit if you are." The offer to settle revealed everything I needed to know about the strength of her legal position. People with solid cases don't typically offer to abandon them at the first sign of serious opposition. Jessica's expensive lawyers had clearly reviewed our evidence and advised her that continuing the lawsuit would likely result in not just defeat, but significant financial penalties for filing frivolous claims. "I'm not interested in settling," I told her, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "You sued me for money I don't owe you, claiming financial hardship that doesn't exist. Now you get to explain that to a judge." "This is insane," Jessica's voice cracked with frustration. "You're my father. We shouldn't be fighting in court. Think about Emma and Jake. Think about what this is doing to the family."
The manipulation was so familiar I could have predicted her exact words. Appeal to family loyalty that she'd never reciprocated, invoke the grandchildren she'd been using as weapons, create urgency and emotional pressure to force compliance. But her tactics no longer worked on me because I finally understood what they were. "You thought about Emma and Jake when you excluded them from Christmas," I replied. "You thought about the family when you publicly humiliated me on social media. This court case is just the natural consequence of choices you made." When Jessica realized that her usual manipulation tactics weren't going to resolve the lawsuit in her favor, she tried one final approach that revealed the true depth of her narcissistic worldview. "Fine," she said, her voice turning cold and calculating.
But I want you to know that when this is over, when you've humiliated me in court and destroyed our relationship, you'll never see those grandchildren again. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing that their grandfather chose money over family." The threat was designed to break my resolve, to force me back into compliance through emotional blackmail involving the children I loved most in the world. But instead of crushing me, Jessica's words crystallized something I'd been struggling to accept. A mother who would use her children as weapons against their grandfather, who would deprive them of a loving relationship to maintain her financial advantage, had already shown me exactly what kind of person she'd become. "Jessica," I said quietly, "if you're willing to hurt your own children to get money out of me, then you've already destroyed our relationship. The court case is just making it official." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute before Jessica hung up without another word. I sat in my kitchen holding the dead phone, feeling not sadness, but relief. The daughter I'd raised, the woman I'd sacrificed for, the person I'd believed deserved my endless support, that person had been gone for years, replaced by someone who saw me only as a source of funding and everyone else, including her own children, as tools to maintain that funding. Maggie called later that afternoon with news that didn't surprise me, but still brought a sense of vindication I hadn't expected. Jessica's lawyers had contacted her office requesting a settlement conference, essentially admitting that their client's case couldn't survive the scrutiny of actual litigation. "They know they're going to lose," Maggie explained, the satisfaction clear in our voice. "Rich people filing frivolous lawsuits count on their victims being too poor or too intimidated to fight back. Your daughter picked the wrong target." As December moved toward its end, I found myself thinking not about the Christmas I was missing, but about the future I was reclaiming. The legal battle would be resolved soon, likely in our favor based on the strength of our evidence. Jessica would face the consequences of her fraud, and I would finally be free from the financial manipulation that had defined our relationship for years. The real victory wasn't going to be in the courtroom. It was going to be in the quiet dignity of a man who'd finally learned to value himself enough to demand respectful treatment from the people he loved most in the world. The settlement conference took place in a sterile conference room at the courthouse, the January rain drumming against tall windows as Jessica and Brandon sat across from me with their expensive lawyers flanking them like bodyguards. Jessica looked smaller than I remember, her usual polished appearance diminished by dark circles under her eyes and nervous fidgeting with her wedding ring. Brandon wouldn't meet my gaze, his attention fixed on his phone as if the entire proceeding was beneath his notice. Maggie laid out our evidence with methodical precision, each document landing on the table like a hammer blow. Bank statements showing the correlation between my payments and their luxury purchases, property records proving their mortgage was manageable without my assistance, social media posts documenting the lifestyle my money had funded, while they claimed financial hardship. Jessica's lawyers shuffled through the papers with increasingly grim expressions. "Your client obtained nearly $30,000 through fraudulent claims of financial distress," Maggie stated calmly. "Our countersuit seeks full restitution plus damages for financial elder abuse. Given the strength of our documentation, I'd recommend your client consider our settlement offer very carefully." The offer was simple and non-negotiable. Jessica would drop her lawsuit, acknowledge in writing that I had no financial obligations to her family, and agree to never again request money under false pretenses. In return, I wouldn't pursue criminal fraud charges or seek restitution for the money she'd already taken. It was more generous than she deserved, but I wanted closure more than revenge. Jessica's lead attorney, a silver-haired man who'd probably charge more for this conference than I spent on groceries in 6 months, leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear. Her face crumpled as the reality of her situation finally penetrated the bubble of entitlement she'd been living in. There would be no payday from this lawsuit,
no forced continuation of my monthly payments, no legal validation of her claims that I owed her ongoing support. "We accept the settlement terms," Jessica's lawyer announced, his voice tight with professional embarrassment at having filed such a weak case. "My client will sign the agreement immediately." The papers were signed in silence, Jessica's signature shaky as she acknowledged that our financial relationship was permanently severed. When the lawyers began packing their briefcases, she finally looked up at me with eyes that held something I hadn't seen in years: uncertainty about her future without my safety net beneath her. "Harry," she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual manipulative undertones, "I need you to know that I never meant for things to get this bad between us." I studied my daughter's face, looking for some sign of genuine remorse or understanding of how profoundly she'd violated my trust. Instead, I saw the same self-centered perspective that had driven our entire conflict, the belief that her intentions mattered more than her actions, that her comfort justified my exploitation. "You excluded me from Christmas because I wasn't sophisticated enough for your friends," I said simply. "Then you sued me when I stopped funding the lifestyle that made you feel superior to your father. Those weren't accidents, Jessica. They were choices." She opened her mouth to respond, probably with another attempt at manipulation or justification, but I stood before she could speak. The conference room felt smaller with all the lawyers and legal documents, but I felt larger somehow, like I'd reclaimed space that had been stolen from me without my realizing it. Walking out of that courthouse, Dot waiting for me by her car with a thermos of coffee and a smile that could have powered the entire building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom from other people's expectations. The weight of Jessica's demands, her emotional manipulation, her constant financial pressure, all of it lifted away like fog burning off in morning sunlight. "How do you feel?" Dot asked as we drove through downtown Riverside, past familiar streets that looked different somehow now that I was seeing them without the lens of obligation and guilt that had colored my vision for so long. "Free," I said, and meant it completely. For the first time since Jessica got married, I feel like I can make decisions based on what I want instead of what she needs. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. It was still the same modest craftsman home with its creaking floors and outdated kitchen, but now it belonged entirely to me again. No longer was it a place where I counted pennies to send money to Jessica, where every purchase was weighed against her assumed needs, where my own comfort came last in a long list of her priorities.
That evening, Dot came over with Chinese takeout from Riverbend Cafe, and we sat at my kitchen table planning the trip we'd been talking about for weeks. The Oregon coast in February wouldn't be warm, but it would be beautiful in its stark winter way. And for the first time in 3 years, I could afford to go somewhere just because I wanted to experience it. "You know what the best part is?" Dot said, opening her fortune cookie with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed life's small pleasures. "Jessica's going to have to learn how to live within her actual means. That's going to be quite an education for someone who's been spending your money like it was hers." I thought about Jessica and Brandon in their big house, facing mortgage payments and utility bills and car loans without my monthly subsidy. They'd have to make real choices now. Maybe sell the luxury SUV, or skip the expensive restaurants, or actually budget their spending like responsible adults. The lessons they should have learned years ago were finally coming due. My phone had been quiet since the settlement conference, no desperate calls or manipulative texts from Jessica trying to find new ways to extract money. The silence might have worried me once, might have made me wonder if she was really struggling and needed help. Now it felt peaceful, like the absence of a headache you didn't realize was bothering you until it stopped. 3 weeks later, I was unpacking groceries when I heard familiar voices in my backyard. Through the kitchen window, I saw Emma and Jake playing in the snow with Dot, their laughter bright against the gray winter afternoon. My heart jumped before I realized what must have happened. Jessica had dropped them off with me while she ran errands, something that hadn't occurred in months. I opened the back door, and Emma ran to me with the unself-conscious joy of a child who hadn't been poisoned against her grandfather by adult conflicts. "Grandpa Harry, we're building a snow fort. Want to help?" For the next 2 hours, I helped my grandchildren construct an elaborate snow fortress, complete with towers and tunnels, my hands numb with cold, but my heart warm with the simple pleasure of their company. When Jessica came to pick them up, she stood at my back door looking uncertain, like she wasn't sure of her welcome in the house where she'd grown up. "Thank you for watching them," she said formally, her voice carrying none of its old assumption that my time and energy belonged to her by default. "They're always welcome here," I replied, meaning it completely. Whatever had happened between Jessica and me, Emma and Jake were innocent of their mother's choices. They deserved a grandfather who loved them without conditions or financial obligations attached. As spring arrived in Riverside, I found myself settling into a new routine that revolved entirely around my own preferences for the first time in decades. I joined the community garden project I'd been interested in for years, but couldn't afford while sending Jessica money. I took a woodworking class at the community center and started building birdhouses that I gave away to neighbors. I discovered that my own life, lived on my own terms, was surprisingly rich and satisfying. The monthly $800 that had once disappeared into Jessica's account now stayed in mine, building into a small savings fund that represented pure possibility. Maybe I'd use it for that workshop I'd always wanted to build. Maybe Dot and I would take that longer trip we'd been discussing. Maybe I'd simply keep it as a buffer against uncertainty, the financial security I'd sacrificed for years to fund someone else's comfort. Jessica and I maintained a polite distance, our relationship reset to something more honest if less warm. She still brought the children for visits, though less frequently, and our conversations stayed safely in the present tense without reference to the past conflicts or future expectations. It wasn't the close relationship I'd once imagined having with my adult daughter, but it was built on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation, which made it infinitely healthier.
On a warm May evening, as I sat on my front porch watching Emma and Jake chase fireflies in my yard while their mother waited in her car, I reflected on how much had changed since that phone call about sophisticated Christmas celebrations. I'd learned that love without boundaries isn't actually love, it's enabling. I'd discovered that saying no to unreasonable demands doesn't destroy relationships, it reveals which relationships were built on genuine care versus convenience. Most importantly, I'd remembered that my own life had value, independent of my usefulness to others. Harold Thompson wasn't just Jessica's father, or Emma and Jake's grandfather, or Dot's neighbor. He was a man with his own dreams, his own needs, his own right to dignity and respect. It had taken a lawsuit and a family crisis to remember that, but the lesson was worth the pain of learning it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.